I'm gonna do the same as last week and analyze another one of my clears because I think more content should be like this instead of yapping about what if scenarios. Anyways, this time it's on H10-1. Hey Ami, I'm back with the... What the hell is this? No, I know it's a giant Ami Fumo. I'm asking how the hell did you get it? They don't just magically come into existence. If you don't know what you're doing on H10-1, it's a pretty brutal map. It's 3 lanes with a boss and a giant mega cannon that wants to blast 3000 true damage at you. Despite the multiple lanes, it's actually not as bad as it seems once you identify which enemies come from where. The bottom lane only features trash type enemies that are basically just an AoE check. The middle lane has Manfred and a few reborn creation guys. The top lane has leeches coming out in pairs and the casters that everyone hates. Enemy count wise, the bottom definitely has more, but your main threats of the map are actually Manfred himself and the top lane enemies. Let's dive into Manfred though, and no, not in that way. Manfred is actually one of my favorite bosses because I like the chapter 10 cannon mechanic and he's integrated pretty well into it. His stats in 10-17 normal are piss easy, but in the adverse and H stages he gets significantly more beef. 60,000 HP, 1200 attack, 600 defense, and 40 res. Manfred has a painful 80% arts and phys dodge, which makes most people resort to using Kautsit or Nerlulcer to kill him, but you can deactivate the dodge ability for 12 seconds in the stage by hitting him with the cannon. He deals 50% of his attack as arts damage in phase 1, and in phase 2, his attacks become 2-hit combos where he deals 100% of his attack as physical damage on the first hit and 50% arts damage on the second. He gets attack speed stacks the more he hits the same target, and in H10-1 specifically, Manfred also deals 20% of his damage as necrosis elemental damage. If an operator's elemental bar is depleted with this type of damage, they get put in SP lockout on top of losing 1 SP and taking 100 arts damage every second for 15 seconds. Not only is draining the SP bar rage inducing, but the arts damage DOT can be deadly in a lot of cases. His attacks in phase 1 give the cannon 3 SP per attack, and in phase 2 gives 6 SP. The cannon needs 120 SP to fire, so if he's at max stacks, it'll take around 20 to 30 seconds to charge it to max. Manfred has like a billion mechanics and it's pretty confusing if you've never actually dealt with him, so let me just summarize this entire Manfred bit. Manfred will dodge most of your attacks unless you hit him with the cannon. His attacks in phase 1 are easy to tank but charge the cannon slowly, and his attacks in phase 2 are harder to tank but charge the cannon faster. The range of the cannon is only enough to hit the top and mid lane or the mid and bottom lane, so as you're making your strategy, you need to decide whether you want to use a cannon to wipe all the reborn creations in the bottom lane or ease your damage requirements on the top side. There are 3 other enemies I have to talk about, and let's start with the one everyone except me absolutely hates. You've probably molded in 10-16 adverse from these guys. They're very annoying to deal with, and understandably so, but they're actually one of my favorite enemies from this chapter. The chaincasters deal a decent amount of arts damage, but what everyone hates about these guys are their attacks that are able to chain through operators in the 8 surrounding tiles, dealing 15% less damage per jump. They also deal necrosis damage, so if you don't deal with them properly, they have the ability to wipe your entire setup when you clump all your ops together. What's even worse is that the casters are reasonably tanky. You need a lot of commitment if you want to take one down, so you actually need to set up multiple ops together to deal with them. The top lane also features the leeches, which, again, not dealt with properly, can result in them becoming a college student, draining the funds and resources that the base of society was built upon. They're super squishy, and you mainly just need enough damage to kill them fast. The last enemy of note are these cars that sit at the start of their spawn for a while. They're not threatening by themselves, but will make all reborn creations deal necrosis damage on top of an increased attack. The big slugma ball guys become decently threatening if the cars are alive on the map. A strat some clearers go for is spawn killing the cars to get rid of that reborn creation buff. That's all the enemies and mechanics analyzed, but this stage also features my favorite overarching game mechanic: wait for kills. In certain stages, enemies spawn in waves, and the next wave will not spawn until there is no one left on the map. Let's take a look at MBEX8 for an example. Going on to PRTS maps, I put the link in the description for all the commenters trying to figure out which side I use. You identify which enemy has the wait for kill tag, and it's this archer guy. This means that the game will spawn all the enemies in order up to this archer guy, and it will stop spawning enemies until everyone is dead. Once there are no more enemies on the map, the game will spawn the next set of enemies. You don't have to stall out the archer specifically. As long as an enemy is alive, the next wave won't start. It should be pretty easy to see how this becomes abusable for you to retreat all your operators and prepare for the later set of enemies. Bosses slightly change up the wait for kill rules though. For 718, the second wave of enemies will spawn after the smaller enemies are killed and Patriot starts his transition phase. Each boss has different mechanics with the game and map, so there isn't really a general rule you can go by. In WDEX8, if you defeat Emperor Blades Phase 1 and all the trash enemies on the map, the next enemies that are supposed to spawn are the 5 elite Imperial Strikers, but the game won't flood you with high level threats everywhere, and instead you get to take on Emperor Blade's second phase by itself, unlike Patriot with his Siege Breakers. In H10-1 specifically, if you defeat Manfred Phase 1 before the wait for kill gate, the second wave doesn't spawn, and as long as you have an alive non-boss enemy, the second wave still won't spawn. This means you have two options in H10-1. Either A, you burst him down before the kill gate, stall out a mob, kill phase 2, and then trigger the second wave of the map, or B, you stall out Manfred and prepare your squad to deal with the next wave of enemies, and phase 2 Manfred at the same time. Wait for kill mechanics force you to choose between bursting and stalling, and while bursting in most cases requires more commitment and is usually less optimal, in some rare instances, it can actually prove to be the smarter strategy, which H10-1 is a perfect example of this. If you were to stall Manfred out, you would have to simultaneously deal with an impending cannon from his phase transition, 2 elite chaincasters from top lane, and a subsequent phase 2 Manfred, so, you know, have fun with that. You know, did you really have to bring this with you to launch? She's a plushie, she doesn't need to eat. The niche used in this video was no auto attack operators, which a lot of people were confused on who counts and who doesn't. Arknights has a list of operators and skills as to who qualifies to be in this category, and they use the definition that if the operator's attacks off skill are affected by attack speed down statuses, then they don't qualify. But finding sources of ally attack speed down is a bit so I thought of a clearer definition. If the operator performs attacks off skill and those attacks are no longer performed when the operator is stunned, then they don't qualify. This category mainly consists of bards, phalanx casters, and liberator guards, with a few exceptions like Angelina, Neural Awesome, and Thermal EX. Bards like Soren Sculptor check out because their aura healing is still there even when they're stunned. Passive skills like Phantom S2 or Scotty S2 don't count because after the skill, they're able to do auto attacks. Neural Alter's second skill is actually an asterisk in this case though, since she is only able to be deployed with her skill up and automatically retreats when it ends. It's basically impossible to have her on the field without her skill being active, and that means she can't do auto attacks at all. Thermal EX doesn't attack, it just explodes, and it still explodes even while stunned. H10-1 no auto attack is interesting to me because Winard, Tequila, and Neural don't solve all your problems. Sure, you can press Winard and Tequila buttons and sit back and do nothing, but the real challenge is figuring out what to do during their downtimes. You don't have any basic attacks, which matters more than you think, and you also don't have any block besides the melee units, and if you want block, you're gonna have to press the skill buttons, dedicating an entire skill to a certain part of the wave. Now that explaining the categories out of the way, most of the squads and skills for this stage should be pretty self-explanatory. Angelina is on S2 because using S3 is a waste if you're using her for top lane. Sculptor is on S1 to help operators tank the cannon. The cannon deals 3000 true damage and Sculptor can share damage with the operators, so under Sculptor S1, an operator will take 1500 true damage instead. Angelina actually can't survive that unless you give her the level 3 mod that increases her heal per second talent. And you're goddamn right I have that mod already despite it being absolutely dog shit. Sculptor can only help tank 2 operators under cannon because she doesn't have over 4500 HP. Carnelian uses skill 2 here because her third skill sucks. This leaves Heidi and Mint as the interesting operators left. Heidi is absolutely goated for chapter 10. Her second talent gives all auto recovery skills in her range and added 0.5 SP per sec. cutting downtimes significantly. What's awesome is that if you fiddle around with the mat and figure out the skill cycles of WinRS3 and Cornelian S2, you realize that under Heidi's SP buff, their uptimes cover each other's downtimes, which is the core idea of a no auto attack strategy. This is why I used both of them to handle the bottom lane. Heidi also has block reduction, which helps redirect cannon shots to where I want them to be. The last operator, Mint, is used to attack cancel the chaincasters. I've used Wildmane enough and have been around Zafeng enough to see any shift skill and immediately see enemy attack cancel potential. Conveniently, Mint's attack interval is exactly half the chaincasters, so it'll perfectly sync. The issue is that Angelina's on the field, so she ruins the perfect sync. But I got lucky here because the windup on the caster attack is extremely long, around a second. All I have to do is press Mint's skill at the very end of it, and she'll cancel their attacks enough. I originally did a 10-up clear of this with Lyn, but then I realized Lyn was useless, so I took her out. Okay, to be real, optimizations are a bit hard to look for in your own strats, but after completing the stage with 10 ops, I realized that if I kept Neural on the field for longer, cleaned up the start of the double caster kill, and prayed for Manfred RNG, I could get rid of her. And that's how she got goned. Shout out to Mess for giving me an account with Pot6 everyone to do this on. Anyways, that's about it. Hope you learned something, or at least became a bit familiar with how these clears work. See ya. We're not keeping this in the office, it's way too distracting. I don't know, put it in your room or something.